Show viewers list. Cool. So today, sorry, I'm just still kind of doing my thing. Was doing some last minute editing before we get started and gonna send the link out. It should have gone out already, but we're getting there. We're getting there. Today, we're going to talk about some of the more difficult missions in the mission packs. Share now. Sorry about that. All right, cool. So yeah, we're going to talk about the more difficult missions in the mission packs. So for everybody out there, thanks for joining us. Let's, if you want to see my gorgeous face, let me find that. There we go. Boop, boop. And now you get to see my gorgeous face. So now we need to go back. How do we go? Save. Boop. I'm using different software today than I normally use, so everything's going to be just a hair slower, and I apologize for that. Documents. So, but it has markup built in, I think. We're going to find out today. Tide of Conviction. There we go. So let's pop that in there. Heck yeah, friend. Let's shrink you down. No, we got to edit the scene to do that. Yeah. Get my face off of there. Save. All right. So this is set up for Tide of Conviction. Generally speaking, there are two missions that people seem to struggle with in the current mission pack. And really, I think even when there were more than two, this was a concept or a type of mission people just kind of struggled with, and that's the Control 2, right? So let's pull up Tide of Conviction real quick. We'll go through it. Tide of Conviction 40K. I'm not, absolutely not doing this on this website. That's not what we're doing. All right, so if we look at Tide of Conviction, you get 1 CP at the start of your turn, right? But you can only ever get it if you control the deployment or the objective marker in your deployment zone, right? Which I like those kind of interactions personally. Having the auto generate command points every command phase is cool, but having a few missions where you have a trigger for it is also fine. As long as it's not in every mission, it's a good way to kind of change it up, keep things fresh, so that you're not just playing the same missions all the time, right? And then Domination. At the end of each player's command phase, the player whose turn it is scores 4 victory points for the following conditions they satisfy. You have to control 2 or more objective markers in order to get 4 points, right? And then if you control 3 or more, you get another 4. And if you have more than your opponent, you get another 4. These types of missions people seem to really struggle on them. And it's funny because oddly, like I tend to thrive on them. And that's because they're a lot more about board control and board presence than they are about just simply killing things. Like don't get me wrong, you can just try to kill things and it could work, but it's not going to matter how much you kill things if you can't position and make your presence on the table good or efficient. So I tend to play into these a little bit better. Part of it's probably because I play orcs, and part of it's because this is just the aspect of the game that I prefer. I prefer the table control, the board control mindset, as opposed to just I'm going to table you and hopefully I win. So the bonus points for this one, right? At the end of each player's first, second, third, and fourth turn, you score 2 victory points if you control at least one objective in your opponent's territory. So if I start here in player A, actually let's try this markup real quick, right? We've got it. If you can see it, let me know. But I start here, right? Let's say that's my deployment zone. It does show up. Heckin' good, friend. I'm pretty excited. I'm going to be the John Madden of 40K here pretty soon. All right, so boop. So let's say this is my deployment zone. All right. In order to score those points, I need to control this objective or this objective. And I am going to have a drawing pad for this. I need to get a stylus for it, but once I have a drawing pad, these will look a lot better and feel a lot better. All right. So that is something I'm also trying to improve on. So I need to control any one of these three for 2 points, right? But I also need to control this one for a command point and probably this one because I'm not going to be able to get all three of these. It's just not going to happen. So let's take these out, right? So either turn one, I need to do this, or I need to not worry about these. And it's going to depend on your army and who you're playing against. There's a lot of variables there that we're not going to be able to discuss in a single sitting, all right? Or at least not all at once. We'll have to kind of move through this in a good or regular kind of way, like in a very natural kind of way. So let's erase all this. All right. So we know what the mission is. Let's go over to our little map here. So this is a GW layout. And the reason I'm using this is because anybody that does events has seen this layout. You might not see it at every tournament you go to, but you know this layout, you know it exists, you know it's a thing that you have, right? And you're gonna see it pretty often. Can I? Yeah, let's zoom that in a little bit so you can maybe see it a little bit better. Okay, so if I'm going first, and this is going to be coming from the perspective of somebody who plays orcs and elves, so this may not be the best approach for your army, but it's definitely not going to be the worst. So these are things to keep in mind also. I'm talking coming from the perspective of an orc and elf player. So if I go first, okay, my turn one, and I'll write it down over here. Let me change my markup color. I'm actually like super pumped about this. I'm like a little kid right now. I'm just like, hey, I know I can change colors. How do I change colors? There we go. We'll make the markup color because ooh, that might not show up everywhere. Let's make it orange. So we're on turn one, right? Turn one, if I'm going first, and again, there's always variables, so this can't be static. But this is going to be like your best case scenario. I'm going to have a unit of grots right here, just to control this objective here. And that's what Gretchen are good for. And if I've got boys, I'll actually consider throwing the boys back there. They're a little bit more resilient. And they're not that much more expensive. And then I can start moving Gretchen up for different things. So if I've got Gretchen, and let me make sure I'm not going to lie to you here, which I'm going to have Gretchen, because of their interaction with some of the secondaries, specifically get the good bits. And that's what I'm checking on right now, because I think it's just outside of not in any player's deployment zone. So if I've got get the good bits, I'm probably going to have some kind of unit here, like boys or grots, right? And then I'm going to move my grots here. And it doesn't have to be grots. If this is 6 inches out of your deployment zone, which I don't remember if it is or not, so let's actually look at Tide of Conviction again, because we can figure that out. So this is 6 inches. 6 minus 30 is 24, and then this is 12. So the objective, it's not going to be 6 inches out of your deployment zone because it's dead center, and it depends on how they're measured, right? So you're not going to be able to use the Eldar one where you got to be 6 inches out of the deployment zone. But I think you can sacred ground that if you're sisters or shrine, whatever that's called, because I think shrine just has to be in no man's land. We're going to double check that. But again, you're getting the point, is that if you have these no man's land interactions, yep, so you can make that the shrine. So if you have these no man land interactions, you can just slap it right there. Hey, thank you, Frank. I appreciate that, buddy. Boom. We're going over Tide of Conviction. Welcome to. We're talking about good ways to kind of work these big 6 objective tables where you have to control 2. All right, so we've got that. So my grots are going to move up here. And again, if you have sisters, you could make that the shrine. Anybody who has a control a no man's land objective, you just put it right there, right? And then you can walk up and you can control it. Obviously, we're assuming you're using GW layout for this example. But again, if you're going to like an open or a big GT, chances are you're going to see that table. So we got something holding here. We've got something holding here. And then typically what I like to do is either have a bait or throwaway unit. Because again, playing orcs, I have that. If I'm playing elves, it's something that's a very maneuverable unit, right? And if I can take this one, I will. Now, if I can't comfortably take it, I'm not going to. I'll sit on my 2 objectives. I'll take my 4 points the first turn. And what I will do, let me undo that. So let's say somebody's got something really gross right here. We'll make this a circle. Maybe it's a set of jump pack veterans. Maybe it's a unit of crisis suits. Who knows? So if I can't put a throwaway unit on this objective, I'm not going to hold it. What I will do, instead of trying to hold it, is come out to here behind the terrain feature and make sure I'm as far away as possible from this unit right here so that I can, my turn 2, either get into that unit or reposition better, right? Now, the other thing is if I have commandos, typically if I have commandos or a forward deploy unit that's real cheap, because commandos are real cheap and they're a throwaway unit, they're going right here or right here, either one. And that's because I got to be 9 inches out of their deployment zone. If I go first, if I want to, I can run up in there and just like gum them up. If they've got a soft target here, and a good example, so I'll give you a good example. I played a game against Tyler, and he just had termagants on his home objective, and that was it. I was playing Deskul's Commandos. I put him here. I went first. My first turn, I moved up, charged his termagants, and killed them all. Big shock, they're just termagants. But because of how he had them, I was able to keep my commandos on the terrain feature to fight, give them +1 to wound, and I just massacred his termagants. Now, his turn 1, he's not generating a command point, right? And he has to get rid of that unit. So if you don't have a forward deploy, don't worry about it. But if you do have a forward deploy and they're cheap, that's what I would consider doing with them. If you have a redeploy, it's even better because then you can pull them back. All right, so let's get rid of all that. All right, so that's my turn 1. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. We're going to send a unit up to grab this objective here. And then we're going to either take this objective or put my unit in a flanking position. Now, here's where the game gets interesting. If I'm playing orcs, I'm going here, here, here. And then I might send a Death Dread or something here just to put something in the middle of the board to kind of have that middle of the board presence. But I don't tend to play the middle of the board. I tend to play the flanks. Now, obviously, again, we don't know what our opponent's going to do because we don't know what we're playing against. But a lot of times, your opponent's going to do some similar stuff, right? They're going to make sure they hold this objective. They're going to come up here and hold this one because it's easy. And then they're going to come up here and hold this one because it's easy. Now, here's where it gets really good, right? Is that if you're playing a Space Marine player, a lot of times they're going to start doing this. They're going to start pushing towards the middle. And there's nothing wrong with it. That's just how Marines kind of tend to play. Okay? And that's fine because that plays into what I want. We started flanking. If you're going to try to take the middle, we're going to play into that. So we talked about what I would do if I was orcs. All right. So now let's talk about what I would do if I was elves. Boop, 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 boop. There we go. So now we've got this. I don't know what this circle was for. Oh, it was just the, hey, what's up, buddy? Welcome back to the stream. We're talking about Tide of Conviction, and really, these kind of fundamentals will work on any of the Control 2 missions. All right, so if I'm playing Eldar or Drukhari instead of Orcs, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this board in half. So let's see if I can straight line this. Oh, it wasn't perfect, but it's not bad. So I'm going to cut this board in half, right? And then what I'm going to do if I'm playing some form or flavor of elf is I'm still going to hold that one objective here because A, I want my command points. I'm still going to grab this one because, again, it's easy. I can sit behind the terrain and hold it. And I'm probably going to do it with a melee-centric unit if I can. If not, then I will do it with whatever. But a lot of times what I'll do is like I tend to put like 5-man witch squads in my Drukhari lists, and that's what I would have here, right? Just a little witch squad. Yeah. Uh, so now that I've cut the board in half, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at your deployment and I'm going to decide what half of the table I want. And a good example of that was I played Votann on Friday. And the Votann player stacks super hard on one side of the board. And because I'm playing Drukhari, I have the mobility, right? So let's say this is the side that they stack super hard. I'm just going to advance everything and start pulling this way. And then I am going to abandon this objective here. This one's no good. I don't want it. And then I'm going to start pushing here. And that's exactly how our game went. He committed real hard to this side. I started advancing and pushing. He took the bait. All right. So what he ended up doing was teleporting some things here to shoot at my guys. He did his once per game teleport. And that was like his biggest, most devastating unit, right? Like the land fortresses are good, but it's only a single shot. We were both playing a Highlander list. He killed like 5 of my Hellions and 3 of my Reavers. But once that happened, I then jumped back here. So I gave him the old bait and switch, right? I hit him with the bamboozle. And he overcommitted on one side, then he moved his units over, like his big heavy hitters, he teleported, and once he did that, I was gone. And that took his Terminators, or whatever they're called, that took those out of the game for like 3 turns. So I haven't talked about holding objectives much because A, we're still on turn 1, and B, the first 1 or 2 turns, I'm not super worried about getting more than my 4 points on primaries. It's just not what I'm going to do. Because again, there's 4 turns of primary scoring. If I can get 14 in the last 2 turns, that's 28 points. That's over half my max in 2 turns. So if I get 8 points, and I definitely agree. And when that book first came out, that was the big thing I saw with them, is that anything that can outmaneuver them is going to give them fits. Now, if you're playing like a slower Marine army, or even some orc builds, some some Marines, anything that you're not building for mobility, that Votann player is just going to have their way with you because you're not going to be able to outrun their shooting. You're not going to be able to outmaneuver them, and those judgment tokens will make you disappear. So, boop, boop, boop. So again, if I get 8 points the first, or 4 points the first turn, 4 points the second turn, or turn 2 and turn 3, I've got 8 points. Now, if I've got 28 points for the last 2 turns, I'm up to 36 in primaries. And then the only thing I need to see is if I can score any of the bonus ones, right? I don't play for turn 1 personally. I play for turn 3. Like, that's my big my big turn, my big push. I know it's very common practice for a lot of players to try to get that super powerful alpha strike. I tend to play for turn 3. My turns 1 and 2 tend to be a little lackluster, and then turn 3 is when I tend to kick it into high gear, and then the game starts picking up. And that's why I tell people, like, when you play a game with me, it's going to be over by turn 3. Right. And it doesn't matter who wins. Our game's over turn 3. Because if I didn't weather your turn 1, turn 2 storm, I'm not going to be able to make that ground up in turn 3. And if I did, by the time I start hitting you and cutting you down in turn 3, it's going to be so oppressive that even if the score is close, you're not going to be able to come back from that. So I tend to play for the counter strike rather than the alpha strike. Okay, so there's my turn 1, right? We take this objective, we take this objective here. Don't worry about this. Actually, we can just erase this now. Now, I get my 4 points, right, on my turn 2. Oh, that's an eraser. Can't draw with that. I get my turn 2. Now, if we assume that my opponent did about the same thing, where they're just like here, and a lot of times opponents will kind of grab that one too, right? Because they tend to overextend. For sure, man. I'm not a Marine player, but I definitely do a lot of that type of stuff. That is how I tend to play this game. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to assess what I've got to look at, because I still don't have to control more than 2. So what I'll do is, again, because of my... Uh-oh, where'd my mouse go? Did we die? There we go. Because of the way I tend to play the game, and because I tend to cut this board in half, I'm going to pick one of these 2 objectives to go after, and that's what we're going to do. And a lot of times, it's going to be whichever one is your weak side. Because, again, a lot of players don't necessarily deploy super balanced, and even if they do, you can kind of exploit that if you have a mobile army like I do. So, let's assume this is the weak side. So we're going to start coming to this objective, right? So what I'll do from there is I'm still going to keep another unit here. So if I've got something here controlling it, and again, let's assume I'm playing Drukhari. I'm going to take this Raider here, turn 1, and I'm going to keep it behind the terrain. I don't care if it shoots. I don't need it to shoot. It's just a transport to get my homies from point A to point B. And if that's got incubi in it, for example, I've now got a good position right here that if you're on this objective on my turn 2, I can disembark, advance, and charge, and whatever that is going to go away. Like, that's just how incubi kind of interact with the game. And then if I don't like it, right, if I need to get over here, I can leave the incubi and the raider for one more turn, for sure. I can leave the incubi or witches or whatever are in here for one more turn. I can slam the raider here. Now I can shoot something with my one gun, right? But I have 2 charge options from here. I can go here if you've got a soft target, or I can go here if I need to. I don't necessarily need to take it. So a little backstory behind me, Frank, is that yes, I was in the Army for 15 years. I was active duty for 6 and then Guard for 9. But the whole time I was in the Guard, I was a salesman. So I just learned how to talk at an expedited rate just because of having to talk all the time. The best fighting isn't, yeah, for sure. And so, like with orcs, I tend to do a turn 2 wah, because my turn 2 might not be very good, but I'm looking at that advance and charge not as a damage dealing phase, but I'm looking at it as a get that extra movement, hit some soft targets, and put myself in better position to hit you harder turn 3. My charging and my fighting are not damage dealing phases, they're extra movement phases. That's how I approach them. So yeah, if we've got the Raider, and we now have two charge options. Now this one's going to be a spicy charge. Like we're probably looking at like a 9 here, whereas this one's going to be a lot easier if they're right up on the wall. You can tag them with the Raider. And what you're doing is two things. If it's a shooting unit, you're either shutting them off because they got to fall back and shoot, or you're tying them up for that reason. Plus, it keeps your Raider protected unless they fall back to shoot it or charge it. And then again, because you're pushing into the backfield by turn 2, you're already dictating how this fight's going to go. My good friend is a Night Lords player. He's in the guard and runs a firing range. One of his NCOs referred to something as twin linked, and he called him out after the meeting. It was like, "Oh, what army do you play, man?" Yeah, exactly. And it's funny, man, because like I started when I was like 16, but once I hit active duty, there were a bunch of us that played. We used to have like big floor hammer games and stuff, and there was a little store outside of the base called the Armchair Warrior, and it was pretty cool. Uh, Absolutely. And every time I go to tournaments, I run into other veterans and stuff, so it's pretty cool. And I digress. This is my life story. But yeah, so when you tag this one or this one, you got to decide which one's the softer of the targets. You're not worried still as much about scoring as you are about positioning. Again, when you play the game the way I do and you're playing for turn 3 and later, your first 2 turns aren't necessarily about scoring. They're about positioning yourself to be in a better position to score later in the game. And then the Raiders, of course, if they get in there, those things are bonkers. Like they're real good. Again, going back to that Votan game, I slammed my Raider into a unit of his troops, and it was, I think, turn 3, so I get +1 to hit in the fight phase and ignore penalties for shooting while engaged. All right, so I charged him with my Raider into a unit of his, whatever their base troops are, and I was just like, all right, man, I get 6 attacks hitting on 3s, and he was like, what? And I was like, yeah. And so, and when I play, 6 attacks hitting on 3s, and because of the witch cult that I play, my boats are strength 8. And he was just like, oh no. So like that boat killed like 4 dudes, and he was just like, do you ever play an army that doesn't have just like melee vehicles? And I was like, no, I don't. It's just what I like about this game. Yeah, and that's it. And even with White Scars, like with you kind of playing White Scars, and dabbling into them a bit more, Frank, one thing you're going to find is that your advance and charge is handy, and it will keep people at bay. So you're not playing to do damage, you're playing for board control. And once you start changing your mindset, you see the utility of different uh units that a lot of people think are just trash or garbage. From what I've seen, the Arc of Bowman objectives are the same. I haven't seen an actual layout yet, but everything I've seen and heard, the missions themselves haven't changed outside of a few key instances where they're scored differently. If I do see anything different, I will definitely let everybody know. I just have to make sure it doesn't violate any NDA that I have because I do work for Games Workshop on a part-time basis. So that's my turn 2, right? We're going to send, if it's a Raider, we're going to send it here, 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 here. If you don't have that mobility, and maybe I'm on their events team. So, like, for Adepticon, I'm going to go run their kill team event. I'm running a 3-day kill team tournament, and then I'm going to be traveling down to Indianapolis for Gen Con, and I run their kill team event there. And then I also am on their build and paint team, so I build and paint for them. So we're going to erase all this. I like it. The pay's not great, but I enjoy the work, and that's what helps. Oh no, I forgot that was. We're gonna cut the center line. So we've talked about turn 1, turn 2, and you see how I position for turn 3, right? You already see that I'm in the position turn 2 to start taking a lot more objectives turn 3 and start holding the board a lot more turn 3. So everybody's like, yeah, that's easy to say when you play Evil Sun's orcs that are running up the board like a bunch of goons, and it's easy to say when you're playing Drukhari, who just like advance and charge and are a bunch of crackheads. But what do we do if we play a slower army, right? So let's talk about if you've got a slower army. Let's clear this out. Because again, these missions, these are the ones that people struggle with, where they've got to hold multiple. Does the change to reserves change my thoughts on what? I mean, it changes my approach to what could be considered good and bad, especially with in conjunction to the changes to. Uh, so with the changes to the detachment, it's already made me kind of rethink units that I could put into an orc list and actually think that they're much better than they are. Flash gits, for example, are kind of ass. Before we dive into slower armies, flash gits are pretty bad. We know that. You know that. I know that. Everybody knows that. Except for some guys who wanted to argue with me on the internet. They didn't know that. Oh well. But they're bad. But when I found out that I could take 6 heavy support selections and it didn't cost me a command point, and then put them into strategic reserves for free, it made me reevaluate immediately the utility of flash gits. Because as soon as I saw that, and again, like if you've met John, Frank, talk to John, I immediately was like, hey, I can now take 20 flash kits, put them in strategic reserves for free. I can bring them out of strategic reserves turn 2, and then for 2 command points, I can throw 90 dice at a single unit, hitting on 5s, re-rolling 1s. And they're strength 6, neg 2, 2 damage. And hey, guess what? You can't make them all. Like, and then because I get the extra 4 heavy supports, I no longer have to sacrifice my battle wagons and death dreads to bring them. Because part of the reason flash gits were so bad for me, A, they're way too expensive for what you get out of them, but B, they take up a heavy support slot. And because I run battle wagons, guess what? They're chewing up my battle wagon slots, and a unit of flash gits is not worth a battle wagon. So I think the new detachment coupled with the free reserves puts or lets you bring some things to the table you wouldn't normally bring, and it lets you come up with some unorthodox lists. What I think is going to happen competitively is that a lot of competitive players are just going to hit that easy button and just take, well, I can take 3 of this and max it out and not spend command points. That's what I'm doing. But then you get more creative players like the Johns and myself, and some of these guys in the play group that you're starting to kind of integrate with, Frank, and you're going to see a lot of interesting things. You're going to see some storm surges because they get faction bonuses. You're going to see some stompers because they get faction bonuses. Things that you don't normally see on the table are going to start hitting the table in our play group real soon, and it's going to be funny. All right, so I've got a slow army, Chris. How do I deal with this? Whether you're Votan, whether you're Marines, a lot of Chaos Space Marine builds that aren't just spamming Possessed, and even Possessed while they're fast aren't crazy fast. I can tell you from firsthand experience, 2 Stompas on the table can be a bit oppressive. And it's funny. It's hilarious. That was a tough matchup. It was a close game, but that was a real tough matchup. But yeah, so if you've got a slower army, all right, here's what and again, let's use I don't want to keep using Marines as an example as a slower army, but it's the army that we all know to some degree. So it's real easy for me to just kind of default back to them and be like, if it's Marines, we can do this, because a lot of those same principles can apply to Chaos, a Votan, or other slower armies. I don't know if it's good, right? But I think that there's play for a sniper Marine character. Because you can give them OBSEC, right? And I think there's play for that. Because there's some interactions with OBSEC that are pretty good. But if it were me, what I would consider doing if I built a list is I might bring like the Phobos Lieutenant Sniper character. And then that might be what gets planted here. Uh-oh. There we go. Here. because I can screen him, right? I can put a unit over there and screen him. If it's a troop, actually, and that's another thing to consider, is Marines got sticky objectives, which is real spicy. Because one of the biggest issues Marines have, and I will secede this, right, is that your units tend to be expensive, even your troops. So if you're leaving your 5-man of troops on an objective, that's like 100, 120 points that you have that's not really interacting with the game. So sticky objectives helps Marines out way more than the extra points. Like it really does. So if you start with, so turn 1, I like scouts. I'm probably putting at least 1 unit of scouts in my list. I might consider putting 2. If you've got Phobos in your list that forward deploys, again, I'm probably slamming 1 unit up here. Again, they're kind of expensive, so I don't know that you want them that, like all of them that far forward. If we jump over here, right? 1, 2, 3. So if we start here, sorry. Oh, okay. This line was just throwing me off. Sorry about that. So if we want to deploy them here on this side, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So they got to be right here. But that you can get within 3 inches of this objective. All right. It's just barely, but you can get them controlling that objective. Boop. Let me undo, undo, undo. All right. So what I'd probably do is I'd probably try to put the Phobos unit somewhere around here, one of your forward deployed troop units if you have them. Simply because if you go first, right, this is already yours, and in your command phase you control it, and you can leave it. You don't have to stay on it. You retain control of it, so you're getting 2 free points. And then again, if you want, you can, if they've got a soft target, leapfrog up here and charge. Or, uh, you know, keep them there. It doesn't matter. Frank, the redeploy for Phobos, do you have to be next to a table edge? Because if you don't, that's another option you have, is to just pick them up so that they can come back in a different spot later. And with you controlling it, okay, and that's what I thought. It's like within 6 inches of the table edge, probably. That's pretty standard. And but it's at the end of the movement phase. Because we're 6. You'd have to advance them, but you might be able to do that. Yeah. So theoretically, I'd have to do the math, but if you control this, theoretically, you might be able to advance them to get them over here and redeploy them if you wanted to. I don't know if the math works out. I'm not going to look it up right now. If somebody in the chat wants to double check it, I'd appreciate it. But I think it will, because you could basically put them like right here. Well, let me undo some of this mess. So you could basically like put them here to control that objective, and then you're cheesing about 2 extra inches away. So you're about 16 inches away. Oh, perfect. Then yeah, you could just, if they don't have a soft target to charge, you could just pick them up and redeploy. You control that objective, and now you're forcing your opponent to try to take that, and you're not losing anything, right? So again, if you're playing against like an Eldar army who needs to have good trades, you're taking away their ability to trade, and you're trying to force them to take that objective anyway, which is also really good because guess what? One of your best secondaries is taking objectives from your opponent. So if you start with this one, and then you get to go first, they're probably going to take it. Because again, it's right there. You're going to take your stuff away or charge onto another objective. You still control it once you leave, and now your opponent's got to think, do I want to come take that, or do I want to let you have it and just keep giving you free points? So if they come down and take it, well, we're getting ahead of ourselves. So you've got slow units, right? So you need something here to control. Again, if you start with assault intercessors or heavy intercessors in the backfield, they can stay on that objective if you want them to, or they can just touch it and then the next turn move away. It doesn't matter. And what I would do is probably dependent on what it is, right? If it's assault intercessors, I'm probably going to start here, as close to it as I can and still being on the feature. If I can be out of line of sight and control it, I will, but I don't think you can, because if I remember right, this right here is about 3 inches is the measurement. But if I go first and I don't get shot off the table, I'm just going to bounce up here with my assault intercessors, right? Because I retain control of this one. Now, you're still going to want some stuff. If your opponent has deep strikes, you're still going to want some stuff to camp this objective just to prevent them from deep striking onto it and taking it from you and preventing you from generating your command points. And that's where having, like, if you've got the unit of infiltrators, they're a great unit for just camping back there because they got the 12-inch bubble. So, again, if you've got 2 units of Phobos, you put the infiltrators here maybe, control it turn 1, move your troops away, or even just move it off of it. So let's, and again, I'm touching on so many things, and I'm sorry if this is confusing, but there's a lot of good information that we can get out of this. Because sticky objectives are bonkers good. If I'm here with Phobos, let's put a P here, right? Or infiltrators specifically. I control it, I can now move them here. And then they still have their 12-inch bubble. So it at least blocks your opponent from coming in on the objective if they have deep strikes. And then again, if it's assault intercessors, I would just bound them up here, keep them behind the wall, and prepare to get them out next turn. Now, this is where it gets interesting because, like, Marines have some really good shooting units, but it's really dependent on what you're bringing. Now, I know the auto bring for most Marines is like Redemptors, and they're good, but I think if you're going to shoot, like if you want a shooting platform, especially with the points drops, like those repulsors are looking pretty nice. They've dropped 50 points, or 30. The Executioner dropped 50. The Gladiators, right, got a good points drop. So you've got some good shooting platforms that are pretty mobile now that just got a lot cheaper. So what I would do is I would take those here, right? You don't want them here. They're not that strong. They're not that tanky. So, like, they don't have an inherent invulnerable save. They don't have any kind of damage reduction. If you're going to camp something to try to lock down this middle lane, I mean, to be fair, most of the game is pretty squishy at this point. That's just the game we're playing. And that's just kind of the way it is. Like, there's only a handful of armies I would call not squishy, and even those can be depending on the matchup. Yeah, absolutely. And again, I've said it 1,000 times. I'm not going to harp on it a month, or a month. I'm not going to harp on it a ton. But January of 2022 saw a sharp spike in power level for the codexes. Uh, and that sharp spike in power level really is what made this game as killy as it's become over the last or over this edition. Custodes came out and they were absolutely bonkers, and then Tau came out and they were absolutely bonkers, and then Craft Worlds came out, and while Craft Worlds themselves weren't necessarily super bonkers, there were some interactions in that book. Um, I haven't gotten to play against it. I know Frank played a couple games on Friday. I played Chaos, and Chaos felt like I thought it would. Like, they get a little bit easier to kill, but they're not in a much worse position than they were already. Like, it was a good, solid book. Part of it was just the matchup was really strong into what I had. Because dude was playing Night Lords, and I play a lot of infantry heavy lists, and I'm a Xenos player, so anything that just messes up the leadership phase just messes me up. So I don't enjoy leadership mechanics in this game in general, so I especially don't enjoy just getting tabled in the leadership phase. That just gives, to me, the feel bads because again, I don't play power armor, so I have to interact with this phase a lot more. Yeah, and Tyler had said some similar things. Like both the games he played, he said like Marines were dying, Chaos Marines were dying, everything was dying. It didn't feel like the old slap fights that it used to and stuff like that. No, they don't. And again, as an orc player, I don't like picking up 50-point Coptas to a bad leadership role. And it's happened where I've picked up 200 points worth of Coptas just because of bad leadership dice. Like there's something that needs to be fixed about that mechanic. Don't get me wrong, it's inherently better than it was in 8th, but it's still bad. All right, so we've got our. If you're gonna lock this down, yeah. Again, being a Xenos player, I don't really have that option. Like I could take 5-man units of witches, but they don't do anything. Like they have to come in tens. I would put a contemptor here if you're gonna lock this down. Yeah, and that so again, we're gonna have a little digression here as we do, a little distraction. You want to fix the meta. You really want to fix the meta. You make hordes viable again. If hordes become viable again, that solves the Harlequins issue. That solves the Tyranids issue. Because again, if I can bring a horde, I don't care how many mortal wounds you're throwing with your Tyranids. I have extra bodies. So that's how you fix that. Is you just start making hordes viable again. You give orcs better leadership mechanics for their boys, even if it's only for their boys. Like you just say, core units within range of a war boss, add 1 to combat attrition and ignore combat attrition modifiers. So as long as they're within 6 or 3 inches of that war boss, they don't have to. And now you don't have it all across the table, but you have a couple units of boys that are going to be able to get there. Anyway, again, sorry for the digression. So if you're going to lock down this middle unit or lane here, you do it with something like a Contemptor or even like a Deradeo. The Deradeo's got an invulnerable save. It has Duty Eternal, and it's got some good guns. You can get the Contemptor double shooting. Again, it has an invul and it has Duty Eternal. It'll still die. Don't get me wrong. But it's a lot more survivable if you're going to try to lock down the middle of the board. All right. But really, especially because there's no objectives in the middle, just leave the middle is kind of my philosophy. I don't just let it be open. Who cares? Because your opponent is probably going to put something there at some point in the game, and that's a trap. All right, so we've got our assault intercessors here, right? And then we've got maybe like a gladiator here. And that gladiator, what you want to do is, if you can, right? Oh, I guess I could have just used this. Woo, there we go. That gladiator, right? What you want to try to do with it, if you've got things to shoot, okay? If you've got things to shoot with your gladiator, you want to get it here. Because you've now got this big lane to shoot in, but only if there's things to shoot. If there's nothing to shoot, don't push it that far forward. There's no reason to, just push it to here. And make sure you're not touching that footprint. If you can control the objective, that's what you want to do, but you want to keep it so that it's protected, so that if there's like a riptide here, right, it's not going to just bounce and then shoot you. If there's a hammerhead there, you don't want it to just bounce and shoot you. You want to keep it protected. Now, obviously, if there's a hammerhead over here or a riptide, it's going to just come up here and shoot you. And at that point, you don't go that direction. You just start working your way the other direction. You know, you don't need it to shoot turn 1. Now, if you have a target turn 1 and it's a good target, by all means shoot it. But if you don't have a target, don't sacrifice or put your gladiator or repulsor in jeopardy because, man, I get to shoot it. Bro, if it's not worth shooting, don't waste your time because you're just going to end up picking it up. So there's your turn 1, right? You want to kind of position that way. If you've got Vanguard vets, right? which are a staple in most Marine armies, or Outriders. Outriders are also really good. Um, Anything that's really fast, I would probably put over here for deployment, right? Especially Outriders because they auto advance 6. And then I would just scream them here. So now you've got, it may not be a hard hitting melee unit, but you have a melee unit that can get somewhere. And again, if it were me playing, I'd be playing White Scars. That's just what I'm about, you know. And this is why I would also consider a repulsor instead of a gladiator, or a right? I wouldn't necessarily do an impulsor because they don't do a lot, but they're not a bad choice. But if you've got an impulsor or a repulsor, hey, it's okay, man. I told you, I'm just ahead of my time. So if we've got a repulsor or an impulsor here, and we can fill it with like eradicators, what I would probably do, right, is I would probably fill it with eradicators, because with White Scars, they have an assault vehicle stratagem anyway. To be fair, I think a lot of melee-centric armies have similar strategies. It's just I play a specific way because I tend to play Xenos, not power armor, and it just kind of like changes my perspective on the game. Not that it's better or worse, but like playing orcs for 20 years has definitely skewed the way I look at this game. So I can, if you've got a good target, dump the repulsor here, right? Like if your opponent went first and they put something, even if they put it here to protect it, I can dump that repulsor, then I can dump out my dudes, put them here like eradicators, and then just shoot. You know, so if you can't do it, don't. But if you can do it and it's worth it, again, start playing like an Eldar player. Start looking at your trades. How can I trade up? If those eradicators are going to die, how can I make sure I get the most out of them before they die? And then if they don't die, that's even better. But that's kind of one of the things that playing with and against Craft Worlds players has helped improve my game, is understanding that everybody plays a trading game. Like, that's the big meme with Eldar, is everybody, like, they're trade dar, right? Uh, but everybody plays a trading game, and if you know how to play the trading game, you can do really good into other armies that play the trading game. So there's your turn 1. We're gonna erase some of this mess. So you got your Vanguard vets, right, or Outriders here. Again, what's in the middle of the board, guys? Nothing. Even if there was an objective here, I would not put anything on at turn 1 or 2. It's just not who I am. You want the middle of the board, you can have the middle of the board. Don't care. Don't care how many points it scores you. That's not where I want to be. So now we've got, like, turn 2 comes around, right? And I hope you guys like all my drawings, because you're going to start seeing them on my stream games too. Yes, and remembering your rules does help. You're right, Frank. You're absolutely right. So now, you know, again, if we've got this objective here, right here, that we put our Phobos unit on, forward deploy, if we have it, we know our opponent's coming to take it. So we know they have that one now, right? But they've probably also pushed to grab this one in some capacity. So now you just have some options. You've got your assault intercessors here that can move. You've got your Vanguard vets or Outriders that can come around and move. And you can get them in a little pincer maneuver where you can collapse in on them, right? Or Blade Guard vets instead of assault intercessors, anything like that. It just depends on how you build your list. But having the ability to advance and charge, again, because if I were playing, I would be playing White Scars. That's what we would be doing. Like, there's a good chance that instead of assault intercessors, it's a 5-man of aggressors. And then the con, because the con's absolutely bonkers. 6-inch aura of reroll hit rolls of 1, 6-inch aura of +1 to wound in the fight phase if you charged. He's absolutely bonkers. So having strength 8, neg 3, 2 damage attacks that are +1 to wound and rerolling hits of 1, you're wounding 99% of the game on 2s. Yeah, and he is a pretty good blender himself. You're not wrong. And then couple that with the fact that in addition to that, if this is a tanky unit, like let's say this is like a Riptide or gosh, one of those land raiders, like a Chaos Land Raider or one of the Hecaton Land Fortresses. For 2 CP, you can lock, like if it's Aggressors or Blade Guard, for 2 CP, you can lock them in the or Assault Doctrine, and they now have 3 damage attacks. So this is why I prefer White Scars, because I'm just like, I get to go really fast and do a lot of damage, and it's funny. But you can have this in like a little encircling maneuver, sandwich it, and then you'll have 2 units on that objective, right? If your repulsor's still here and your opponent didn't put anything for you to shoot turn 1, he's probably going to have things for you to shoot turn 2, right? Even if he's just got some stuff here, because you can take that. Well, let me clear out some of my Phobos mess here. And I don't know if these videos are helpful for all of you guys, like honestly. If they are, let me know, because I'll do more like that. And if you'd rather see it on an actual table instead of drawings, let me know, because I can do that as well. So if they've got something here, hell yeah. Holding that objective, your repulsor is now in a position to move here, touch the terrain feature so that you can ignore the obscuring and shoot here, right? And then if you still have things in it, you can, if you're White Scars, CP, get them out. If you're not White Scars, you probably want an impulsor for this type of maneuver. Keep that in mind. But again, because of who I am as a human, this is what I'm doing. And what's really cool is, let's say it's an impulsor, right? You can get out. If you can tag that objective, you can have troops in there and you can take it, right? And still shoot. But I think that's kind of a waste of an impulsor. I'd probably put Hellblasters in it or Eradicators, which I don't think Eradicators go in the impulsor, but I'd probably put Hellblasters in it if it's an impulsor. Because you can get out, boop, and the impulsor holds 6. So what I would probably do, again, if it's an impulsor, I'm probably putting 5 of the Assault Hellblasters in it, because they get 3 shots, strength 6, neg 3, 1 damage, supercharging to 7, 3, 2. And I'm probably putting a chaplain in there with them to buff shooting. And when they get out, I'm just going to spend 2 CP to auto litany +1 to wound. That's what we're doing. Don't care. Because now you got strength 6 shots that are +1 to wound. And you're going to be damaging Land Raiders on 4s with it, right? And you're going to get 15 shots. So again, you're going to average 10 hits, which is going to average 5. You're going to do on average about 5 damage to a Land Raider if you don't supercharge. Now, obviously, if you do supercharge, you're going to do on average about 10, but you're also going to lose a model or 2, which is what it is. You know, if you don't have any rerolls there, that's fine. And Inceptors, we're not even going to get into Inceptors. Those things are bonkers. I love them. It's one of the few Marine units and models where I'm like, these are so cool. But those also play into your positioning. But yeah, if they've got something here, which chances are they will, unless, of course, they're Marines because they have sticky objectives, they're going to have something camping that objective. So you can take your repulsor, plant it there, still be able to shoot. If it doesn't die, okay? Let's say you've got a squad of guys there, and it doesn't die. And they've got like 1 or 2 models left in that unit. What are we doing? Does anybody have a guess? I'm going to give it a couple seconds because I know I'm on delay. We're charging with the repulsor, right? That's it. You got it, buddy. we're gonna send that repulsor into the unit. He's not gonna kill it. He doesn't have to kill it. But what he's gonna do is he's gonna take that extra movement if he makes the charge, and if they die to leadership, or you do get lucky and spike your rolls and they manage to die, it's now your objective. So again, the charge assault phase isn't a damage dealing phase first. It's a movement positioning phase first, damage dealing phase second. And if you approach the game that way, you are going to get a lot better at it. It's so Frank, have you played against Alex yet? Because you're gonna find, and so when we went to the Chicago Open, right? Every game, Alex was like, he plays Tau, and he'd be like, I'm gonna charge you with my breachers. And every game, that opponent was just like, what? But Alex understands because of the local group that he plays with, right? He understands how the charge fight phase works pretty well, especially considering he plays Tau. Because he plays with me, who's an Orc player and a Drukhari player, and then Matt, who's a Demon player and a Chaos Marine player, and then Tyler, who's a Templar player and a Tyranid player. And then Kyle is not a good example because Kyle tends to play shooty armies. But Anto, who's a CSM and Orc player, like because he plays with so many melee-centric armies in his playgroup, he's learned how to use his charges to steal objectives from people and to kind of get that extra positioning and movement. And that's how you need to start looking at your charge phase. Can you kill things? Yeah, that's fine. But can I take things from you? Can I deny you things? And that's where it gets more important. And that's going to be what unlocks your, that's going to be what bumps you up in the tiers as a player. You know, changing your perspective on what the different phases are actually used for. So that'd be like how I would probably play my turn 2 is if I can, I'm going to get my repulsor here if there's good shooting. Again, if there's not good shooting there, there's going to be targets somewhere, and we need to start picking them apart and figuring out where they are. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why Eldar are so good in the hands of a really good player because they get extra movement in the shooting phase, or like swooping hawks with their redeploys, like their teleports. So if there's not something here, there's gonna be something here somewhere, unless for whatever reason their whole army is just in this quarter of the board, which is not likely. So again, you can take your repulsor this way, excuse me, and depending on what the board state is going to determine whether you touch into that terrain or not. And then there's got to be something here or here. There can't be nothing in there unless you've just had an amazing turn 1 and have just killed it all. But again, like I've already told you what I would have done turn 1, so you know I'm going to have a raider here or over here, right? I'm going to look at where your repulsor is, and I'm going to try to not be anywhere near that thing. And that's just, the way it is, because, I know what they do. I'm not going to mess with it unless I have to, right? But we've now gone from controlling, 2 to 3 objectives to potentially controlling 3 to 4 in the first 2 turns. And the only reason is because of sticky objectives, right? If we didn't have sticky objectives, we'd probably still only control 2. But that's where I would kind of lean into this, right? You use your Phobos units if you can to control 1 or 2 no man's land objectives so that if you go first, you can leave them. So one thing to keep in mind is 1 unit can control 2 objectives, but 1 model cannot control 2 objectives. So if you can stretch out your Phobos unit on deployment to where it controls 2 objectives, that's a win. Because even if it dies, unless it died in melee at the start of your turn, you're going to control 2 objectives you didn't control before. And while turn 1 it doesn't matter, it matters for dictating the course of the game. So if I can start the game in control with 2 objectives, it's going to help dictate the course of the game and force my opponent to play the way I want them to. Now, your opponent may not do that. They may not take the bait, and that's fine. But it's better if they do, and it's better when they do. And having that option is better than not having it at all, right? All right. So let's just wipe this whole thing clear. Boop. So again, if let's talk about slower armies, right? because I already know how I would play my orcs on here. I've already talked about it. Like, I'm going to get the good bits. I'll plant my grots here, and I'm just going to cheese it for as long as I can. I'll take the biggest and the best, and I'll have like a fast war boss, right, that I can camp on an objective and just camp for scoring points. And I might even camp him, and it would make more sense to just camp him here also, right? And I don't even need a fast one at that point. I can just advance a war boss and mega armor, get him right behind. And even if he doesn't move, I'm going to get 15 points for good bits, and I'm going to get 10 points for the biggest and the best. So I just got 25 points to just sit on an objective. Is it boring? Heck yeah, it's boring. I hate playing that way, but that's kind of the way I have to play the game to score points with orcs right now. And then if you get close, I get to fight you and get more points. Uh, and then my third objective, honestly, on a mission like this, I've got the biggest and the best. It's gonna probably just be dictated by what you're bringing. You know, if you got no prisoners points, I'll take that. If you got bring it down points, I'll take that. If you've got assassinate points, I'll take that. It doesn't matter. Um, that third one is what it is, right? And then Drukari, 9 times out of 10, I'm taking Herd the Prey. I get 2 points for every table quarter you're not in. Again, unless you're playing a hyper fast army, I'm getting 4 points the first 2 turns most games. And then because of the way that I play Drukari, I can usually score 2 points every turn, minimum, just because I don't play the whole table with Drukari. I play half the board at a time, and if I can clear out half that board, awesome. I might have one turn where I get 2, but then the next turn I get 3 type of thing. So and then, I'll take that. And then probably, like banners wouldn't be a bad one on this table because I'll have the extra units of witches and stuff. Or, like engage on all fronts or behind enemy lines. Like I have good options is the main thing. So if I'm playing a slower army like Marines, all right, on this on this table, first of all, I'm taking banners all day long. With sticky objectives and banners, you can just have points generating and not even have to be next to an objective. So again, if I've got my Phobos unit here with I need to just make them infiltrators. If I've got my infiltrators here, because that's what they are, it's not specifically Phobos. Turn 1, I can banners, right? Let's plant our banner. Whee! There we go. All right, I'm having fun now. I can plant my banner and then walk away. But you don't want them too far, remember. You just want to camp them in here to keep their 12-inch no strike deep strike bubble. It's less relevant if your opponent doesn't have any deep strikes, but it does prevent like the Tau redeploy or GSC redeploy or even like Marine redeploys, right? And then I'm going to take one unit and come up here, right? And we're going to plant another banner. Let's plant that banner. So turn 1, I'm going to have a minimum of 2 banners. If I've got a cheaper like assault intercessor unit that can get in range here, I might plant a banner here. If you've got your Phobos unit that forward deploys here, again, if you don't redeploy them, you can keep them on that objective. I would just huddle them up as close to the wall as possible and plant that banner. But if you do this, right, and this is very specific to this mission, but if you do this and you get this to work, like, hey, I got lucky and I got to go first, guess what? You've got 4 banners on the table. What happens now is that in your next turn, if your opponent can't get to these backfield ones, you got 3 points minimum. If they can't retake this one, you got 4 points. And if you really wanted to, right, you could forward deploy on this one also and try to do that. I think that's getting a little greedy, and you're probably going to start trading down in ways you don't want to, but it may end up working. And it may be worth the gamble. I just know that like Space Marine redeploys pregame are I think restricted to Raven Guard, so you don't want to get too crazy with them. You want to probably have some stuff in a safe place. So you might like deploy them at least in the feature if you're going to do that, rather than slam them forward immediately and then just let them move up. FW, what do you mean by that, buddy? FWIW. Are you talking the Army of Renown? Because if you're talking the Army of Renown for competitive play, those are going to go away. And then Raven Guard can redeploy 3 Phobos units pre-game. Is there a generic way to do it? Oh, okay. Nope, that's fine. If it's Phobos specific, then again, no, and a good. This is why I need people who play Marines when we're talking about Marines, because like I do know a lot about the book, but I don't know all the intrinsic details of it. And there probably is. If there's a Phobos Warlord trait that lets you do it, if this is your strategy, I think this is worth it, and it works. Like you can slam 2 units really far up, 3 units really far up. Lord of Deceit. Let's look it up real quick. Lord of Deceit. Uh, After both players have deployed their armies, select 3 Phobos units and redeploy them. If this mission uses strategic routes, blah, blah. Okay. Yeah. So this is after deployment, but before determining who goes first. So it's a little bit less relevant than say like the Craft Worlds one or the Drukari one, because the Drukari one is like we roll, we get to see who goes first, and then I can redeploy. Um, so this one works a lot more like the Orc one, where it's just like after everybody's deployed, you can redeploy, and it might still be worth. I'm not saying it's not. Is it only Phobos keywords you get to redeploy? Yeah, and it's only Phobos. And again, like this isn't necessarily a bad strategy. Uh, Probably that would make sense, or at least the guy that has this. I think it's probably just the guy that has. It's probably a Phobos only warlord trait. Not that your warlord needs to be Phobos. It probably just can only go on a Phobos dude. But I would have to dig. Um, Still not a bad strategy because you could try and dictate how deployments go and then just kind of like redeploy things. It's just a little bit less powerful than say like uh whatever the Eldar one's called, where they just get to just move 3 units and just be done. So, but yeah, again, if you want to, that's a thing you could do. And then if you get the first turn, you can drop a banner there. And then if you get that lucky first turn, you can have 5 banners on the board turn 1. Like you can, absolutely. And again, you're dictating the flow of the game without even having to kill a model. And that is so much more powerful than just being able to kill models. Because now you're telling your opponent, hey, I've got all of these objectives, I've got banners on all of them, and you can't take them all. But the only reason I would consider not doing every objective like that, right, is if we do just this one or just the other one, we can try to force our opponent a certain direction. And to me, that's more powerful. If I put banners everywhere, you're just going to go everywhere. And that doesn't help me dictate where you go. Whereas if I put a banner on one of them, it can help kind of force certain units to that objective. Because again, if there's no banner here, I might not go that direction. Just because, again, if I'm playing like Drukari, I don't have the table presence to hold all these objectives like this. So if I've got a banner on one side and not a banner on the other, I'm more likely to go knock that banner off if I'm only going to hold one of those objectives just to help prevent you points. Because if turn 1 you get 4 points from banners, or turn 2 you get 4 points from banners, you're going to have that capped in 3 turns, and there's not going to be much I can do about that more than likely, you know? So it's one of those where sometimes less is more, is kind of how I would look at that. So we've got banners. Again, some of these Marine secondaries are really good. I would take the one where you get points for taking objectives from your opponent. I forget what it's called. Frank, I know you know it. Help me out, buddy. But you get 4 points if you take control of an objective that your opponent previously had control of. Actually, I have shock tactics. Yep. There we go. I was saying I could just come over here and we can look at it. I know we talked ad nauseum about uh, secondaries, so we're not going to dig into it. Uh, so I would probably take banners. I would probably take shock tactics, right? Uh, and honestly, if I'm playing Marines, because of the points adjustments that I've had, I'm going to consider bringing an Inquisitor because he's a cheap caster that I can use for psychic actions. And while his spells aren't amazing, they're not terrible. You can give a unit a 5-up invulnerable save, and that's probably what I would take. So if I take, it opens the door for a cheap wizard that can do psychic interrogation or warp ritual. And then in addition to that, yep, -1 leadership. And then, like I said, I'd probably take the 5-up invulnerable save one because, again, it helps protect your units and doesn't necessarily make you feel like you need to rely on storm shields all the time. Are storm shields better than a 5-up invuln? Its warp charge got one worse is the main thing. The command point I never really cared about. And yeah, line of sight you're going to need. Warp ritual is also pretty easy though. And, you know, the reason why you need line of sight, though, is because of Eldar. Like, it is. Let's be honest. Yeah, Eldar, yes and no. I can't disagree with that, but Eldar being able to do psychic interrogation and then, well, I guess T-Suns probably could too. I forgot about warp time. But the trick with Eldar was to put it Farseer on a jet bike and then just like go do your thing and then use the warlocks to let him move again so you could get 24 inches of movement. Uh, well, and so Dark Angels are going to interact with Codex Warfare better than probably any other chapter if they build into it, right? Because they don't have to sit in the Devastator Doctrine. If you play all the wings, you can Devastator Doctrine for the first 2 turns with your Raven Wing. You can do 1 turn in the Tactical Doctrine turn 3, right? And that's basically like a throwaway. Like if you score points, awesome. If you don't, awesome. But then you can have 2 turns in the assault doctrines for 4 and 5 to score points. So I think in general, Dark Angels and yes, Iron Hands are going to be the 2 chapters that probably interact with that the best. I don't know how some of the other ones do. White Scars and Space Wolves probably interact the worst, like the more melee centric ones. I could see Ultramarines interacting with it pretty good depending on the build, just because the fallback and shoot is really good for them and it keeps them able to keep moving and shooting. The -1 penalty is kind of poopy, but whatever. Um, so Marines do have some good options for scoring, and the changing of the doctrines does open up some of their objectives that they didn't have before that weren't, let me rephrase, that weren't very good. Like Codex Warfare was not good. I like it because it's flavorful, right? But from a scoring and gameplay mechanic standpoint, it's not a good secondary. Yeah, I just don't know all the chapters really well to be able to spout off some. Because again, I know Imperial Fists. I've seen them on the table a little bit, but like it's been so long because my buddy that has Imperial's Fists doesn't really play much anymore. So, but yeah, so you've got, and what you want to do is you want to like shock tactics and banners. There's some subtle layering going on there, and that's what you want. if you can drop a banner, you can try to force your opponent to take that objective, especially if you just walk away from it afterward. And then they're going to be tempted to go knock your banner off to prevent scoring. But if you position properly, you're going to be able to countercharge back onto that objective, take it back, and score 4 points. So you're going to be playing a little bit of cat and mouse bait and switch with your banners and your shock tactics, but those two go really well together if you play into them. In addition to that, your I don't even remember what categories these are. Let me find out. Okay, I guess that's not what we're doing. All right, Space Marines. There we go. So shock tactics is battlefield supremacy. What was the other one? Codex warfare is purge the enemy, which makes sense. And then banners is shadow ops. So you have 3 right there that if you play into them, you can score pretty well on them. Now, are they going to be an easy 15 points? No. But is it going to be probably a consistent 8 to 12 if you learn how to play into them really well? Absolutely. And then if you couple that with like your chapter specific secondaries that you're going to have access to, like you're going to have some neat options to kind of layer your scoring and make it feel pretty good. So I think we've probably touched on this for long enough. We've kind of talked about how to play on the 2 objective control 2 boards. So I think we're going to probably wrap this up. We've spent about an hour and a half kind of digging into everything. I do have a stream game going on Thursday. It's going to be Ymir and Farsight. It's going to be my buddy Kyle and my buddy Alex. We're going to kick that off around 10 a.m. We're going to be doing things a little bit differently. I am going to be exclusively running the stream computer now. I will no longer be playing on stream. And I'm going to be kind of doing a bit of what we saw here, where I'm drawing on the table and kind of talking about what's happening, as opposed to the players just being mic'd up. We will have them mic'd up. There will be conversations with the players, but we're going to have a little bit more of this type of interaction where I'm kind of like commentating and kind of talking about what I think could happen or should happen. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't know if it's going to be better or worse for the viewers. So again, if you guys watch it, I appreciate whatever feedback you can give me, because anything I can do to make my streams better for you is better for everybody. So thanks for watching, and we will see everybody Thursday. Reminder, I'm not streaming Tuesdays right now because I've got 40 boxes of terrain to build for Games Workshop. Have a good one, guys.